following are events from Reddit. Events so scary you wish they were only in your nightmares. Viewer discretion is advised. Was it a nightmare or was it real life? You decide. Sleep paralysis or home invader.
I was 12 when it happened. I really struggled with sleep. Some nights I wouldn't sleep at all. My parents took me to a sleep psychologist, and they couldn't really figure out what was going on either. I managed to get my things together and in over time began sleeping better and better. And that's when everything started happening. I thought I was better. I had 3-4 months of consistent good sleep. Then one night I remember I fell asleep, and it felt like I had sleep paralysis. It felt real. I could see this man walking to my room. I didn't know the man. He had a wrinkled face, tall, slender build, and piercing eyes that felt like they went straight into my soul. This man terrified me. As he just stood over looking at me, I began to feel pressure on my chest. I wanted to scream but couldn't. He then gave me the most terrifying smile and walked out the room. It took me about 30 seconds to be able to actually get up and look around the room. I wasn't sleeping. That had to be real, right? I went downstairs and asked my dad if he had his friends over, and he did not. I told him what happened and he ran through the house looking around each room by room, but he couldn't find anyone. Because I had a history of sleep disorders, he assumed that that was the case. The next few nights nothing happened, which led me to think that this was just a dream. It couldn't be real. Maybe it was just a moment of relapse into my old patterns. That night I remember falling asleep thinking I figured this out. I know how to sleep and get well rested. That night I remember waking up hearing a sound on my door creaking, and a white pale hand had opened the door. In walked the man from a few nights ago. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I watched this man as he walked over slowly, grinning, looking me straight in the eyes. This time was different. He leaned forward close enough to me I could feel him breathe on my cheek. He stood there for what seemed like forever. Then slowly standing up, he walked back out the door. Just like the night before, it took me about 30 seconds, maybe a minute, to be able to get to the point where I could stand up and walk around. I ran downstairs to my dad, but he wasn't having any of it. He took me back upstairs and stayed with me until I fell asleep. The very next night the man showed up again, but this time when he came into the room he closed the door. Walking slowly over to me, I was as terrified as I ever was. I wanted to stop and I didn't know how to make it stop. Was I dreaming? Was it real? I don't know. I just know I wanted it to end. This time the main line for him, he whispered in my ear, "I'm coming for you." I've never felt so much fear that my eyes instantly teared up. Even though I was paralyzed, I could feel the tears running down the side of my head. I wanted to move but couldn't. He got on my bed and stood over me, this time standing straight up. He reiterated time and time again, "I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for you." He then began to lean over to the window that was beside my bed. He opened it and walked out onto the roof. 30 seconds go by and I can finally feel and I've got control of my body again, and I wake up just screaming for my dad. My dad rushes into the room saying, "What's wrong?" But I knew I wasn't dreaming at this point. As my dad rushes into the room, there were two things. There's an open window and footprints of where the man stood on my bed. Screaming at my dad that we have to get out of the house and somebody's here and this isn't a dream. My dad looked at me with a kind, caring face and said, "Honey, are you sure you're not just having bad dreams again?" I couldn't believe it. Being a kid, not having any parents wanting to listen to me, I need to convince him that this was real. This had to have been a person. That couldn't have been bad dreams. I begged him, pleaded with my dad, but he wasn't having any of it. I never went back to sleep that night, but I felt I was able to make progress. Because later that day I convinced my dad to let me sleep at my grandparents'. My grandparents' place was old and dingy, but I felt at home, thinking to myself, and my grandparents' place in a few hours away, and this was going to solidify either it was real or I was making it up. The next 3 nights were some of the best sleep I ever had. I called my dad every day to tell him I had a great night's sleep, to ask him how he was doing, ask them if you heard anything in their house, and everything seemed to be fine. That night I was sleeping in my grandparents' house on the top floor. I woke up to hear the door slowly open. I couldn't move. All I could do was move my eyes to the right to look at the door. I could see the door slowly opening, but I couldn't see anyone there. I was trying to figure out what was going on. Was I going crazy? Was I already crazy? And then I saw him. The man from the night before was gazing in creepily around the door frame. He hadn't walked in yet, but he stared right at me as my eyes teared up again. This time the man walked in almost like an animal, sometimes walking on his hands, his knees, his feet, all the way up to my bedside to where he leaned in and I could feel him breathe on my cheeks again. To which with the moment that was the single most terrifying moment of my life after his third breath, he yelled at the top of his lungs, "Scream. I dare you to scream." I couldn't move my body, but my emotions were so intense I thought they could kill me, and I wanted them to. I wanted to scream but I couldn't. I closed my eyes, squeezing them as tight as I could, and when I opened my eyes the man was gone. The door was open but the man was gone. As I sat up crying in my bed, my grandparents came in looking very concerned, and they asked me if I had said something to them or if I called out to them. I cried. I told them what was going on, and when I said there was a man in here who said I dare you to scream, they looked at each other with a sign of concern on their face that made my heart sink down into my stomach. I asked them what was wrong and they looked at me and said when they were downstairs and watching TV. It sounded like I had screamed down to them that I wanted ice cream. Did my grandparents hear the man? Was this proof? The next day I called my dad at 5 p.m. like I always did, and he said to me I had somebody stopped by the house looking for me. My heart stopped. I asked him what did the man look like. He told me he was an older fella, pale-skinned, thin-built with the little black eyes. He didn't tell my dad why he was looking for me, even though my dad asked. The end of the conversation with my dad, by saying that he would be by again. That was over 5 years ago. I don't know if I am crazy or if it was real. All I know is I want this to end.
The ex-boyfriend.
I suffer from insomnia. I have my whole life. When this happened, I was 32. I never told anybody this, but I feel it weighs on me and I have to get it off my chest. I know some people will be upset by me saying this, but I do think it's a factor into the story. As a 32-year-old woman, I would feel that I am always been kind of blessed in the looks department. My mother was a very attractive woman, with a very busty build, and the apple didn't fall far from the tree. I had multiple relationships that had ended very, very poorly. If you had looked at my last few ex-boyfriends, they all were your typical hothead, and even though each relationship ended for different reasons, they all ended in very ugly arguments. One of my exes told me he was going to show up at my property, kill me with a shovel and bury me in the backyard, because I had no friends that I would sit there and rope for years before I was found. Another one of my boyfriends accused me of being a dyke and told me that I would never find another man as great as him, and that he refused to let me go. He would always be around and that he wasn't willing to accept that I no longer had feelings for him. Another one of my boyfriends was crushed, but I could tell he was trying to play the strong, silent type. He always wished me it was the best for me, but that didn't last. What made it so unsettling was that I would see him around town and he would always be so friendly and polite with me. He seemed happy and seemed nice to run into each other. The few friends I did have showed me messages from him to them that made me think otherwise. Messages about him going to kill himself. Messages about him being outside my property at all different times of day. Messages about him potentially kidnapping me just to convince me that we still love each other, which is why it made me running into him in the superstore so unsettling. As somebody has suffered from insomnia, you learn to deal with it by finding things you can do at all different times a day. One of the things I played was Call of Duty Online. One night I was playing Call of Duty Online. I heard something that I thought was in my headphones, but I quickly realized it was on my window on my top floor. It was like a tapping sound. I was startled, so I took my headphones off and quickly turned around to look at the window, but nothing was there. I remember thinking to myself maybe it was just a squirrel or branch, but nothing serious. I put my headphones on and kept playing. 5 or 6 minutes go by and I can hear the tapping again. I quickly turn around. Again, nothing. I get up out of my chair to look through the window, and yet I couldn't see anything. There was no squirrels, no branches that were even close to the window, which is when I heard one of the doors in my house slam shut. Rightly so, I was terrified, but I went to investigate the door. I went to the room, which was a guest room in my house, and the door was shut, and I slowly opened it, looking around the room trying to figure out if anything was out of place. But everything seemed to be normal. Everything was there. The window was shut. Nothing was out of the norm. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the closet. Terrified as you can imagine, I opened the closet, and there was nothing. I think you sometimes like these, or you tend to overthink and think about the worst. And this is what I told myself. When I went back to the room, my game is still on, but I noticed the window was open. I stopped in my tracks. Did I open it? Did I open it before I was playing a game? Did I open it when I went to investigate? I couldn't remember. It's not that far-fetched for me to have opened the window to get a cool breeze coming in, as it is something I used to do every now and then. Once I convinced myself that I had opened it and that the wind was responsible for hearing the door shut, I slowly moved my way to the window. Slowly peering out the window, I looked around. I couldn't notice anything. I didn't see anything strange. I figured to myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. So I shut the window, went back to my game, sat down at my desk, and took a sip of my water. I'm not sure how much time passed, as you can quickly lose track of time when you're playing video games. However, I noticed myself getting more and more tired, rapidly tired, to the point where I felt like I couldn't almost control myself. I stopped the game, I stood up, I made it about 2 steps over, and I found my bed. What happened next are the moments that I will never forget. Remember seeing a silhouette of a man come out of my closet. Trying to regain consciousness and move, I could barely keep my eyes open. It was an effort just for me to open my eyes, and when I did, my eyesight was blurry. The man quickly moved over to me, grabbing me by the hair and dragging me to the floor. What was happening to me, I thought. I was so out of it that even when I hit the floor, I could barely feel it. What is this, real, or was I dreaming? I could feel the man's hands around my throat, but because I was barely conscious to begin with, I couldn't tell if it was because he was choking me or if it was because I was feeling that I couldn't focus. I felt his hands go all over my body, wondering what he was going to do. Everything went black. I remember being conscious at one point. I have no clothes on, and the man had me by one ankle and he was dragging me closer to the bed. My next memory is being in my bed in the morning, waking up with a pounding headache and very little clothes on. As I sat up, I noticed my closet door wide open. Feeling nauseous, I looked around the room. I felt sore, my neck hurt. But what happened? Was that real? Was that the insomnia in a bad dream? Better yet, I remember closing my window. Why did I wake up with the window open?
Jock gets what he deserves.
Growing up, I was always the type of guy to make fun of my friends. I don't want to say it was a bully because there was some humor behind the way I did it, but you definitely wouldn't want to hang out with me if you couldn't stand me making fun of you. I was fortunate to grow up in a very competitive household with 2 parents that were former pro athletes, and they really taught me from young age not only not to care what people say, but not to let it affect you. That's probably a big reason I always thought other people were too soft, cried too much, and couldn't take any criticism. When I was in university, my roommate was a very soft loser, a person who took everything personally. Literally couldn't say anything to him without him taking offense to it, which made us the best of roommates, lol. Joking aside, we actually did have a good friendship. We enjoyed going out, hanging out together, even hitting on women. We thought we were a good pair in that size. He's a kind, nice, sensitive guy. I'm a bit rough around the edges. When we seemed to like the duo. Now keep in mind, he seemed like he had to talk to 100 women to get one to sleep with him, but maybe that's just me making fun of them again. One night we were out drinking with a bunch of people, and these guys are being just completely rude. They were type of guys that went out and you could tell all they were doing was looking to fight someone. I had a few drinks in me, and by all means I was game. I just needed a reason, and I found it. They came over to us and started making fun of me directly. Shortly after, within seconds, they started making fun of him. That was my end. I found my reason. Seeing him being a guy that takes everything to heart, I know he wasn't going to forget about it. In the next few days he's going to dwell on it, and I was going to ruin his week. It wouldn't have any part of that. So we go outside now, and truthfully, these guys get the better part of me. Not one of my best moments. I know one of the guys I hit, I knocked a couple of his teeth out because I could see him fly out of his head. And I'm like 99% sure I broke one guy's jaw just because the way he was hanging there after I hit them. But the rest of it did not go my way, and I was roughed up. I remember the one guy had said to him that he looked like a Lady Gaga fan. So as we stumbled our way back home, I looked at him and said, "This is all because you had to be a Lady Gaga fan." I thought it was funny at the time, but he did not. He actually went off, like more than I ever saw anyone lose it. It was like once of those buttons you hit and all control is gone. He said, "You man, I hope you die in hell. You think you are so thought because who your parents are? Well, you're wrong. They might be winners, but you are a loser. Someone with low self-esteem who needs to get in a fight to mask the pain and suffering you feel. All those late nights you cry to yourself because you know who you really are. Maybe you can't pleasure women, or maybe it's because you know you won't amount to shit that you act this way. Either way, man, your night's going to go from bad to worse. Honestly, I looked at him and I was just shocked. I couldn't believe he even came up with half the stuff off the top of his head. I guess later on I realized that he probably had all that stuff built up inside him, he just wasn't speaking up about it, right? Regardless, he was right, my night was about to get way worse. We both stumble back, not saying a word to each other. We get in the house, I go upstairs to look at how bad I'm actually cut. He goes into the kitchen. He comes upstairs and I can see him in the mirror, holding a kitchen knife, looking at me with a crazy look in his eye. Ask him what he's doing. When he goes off yet again. You can't keep doing this shit. You're not tough shit. You're weak and you're hurting on the inside. I can tell, it's written all over your face. I had to cut it right out of you. Now this is one thing that my parents taught me about being very competitive. When you have someone who's beta and they get loud and aggressive, they aren't used to it. So if you get loud and aggressive right back, they shut off. So that's what I did. I screamed back at him, what the duck are you gonna do? I said, I'm beat up, you're the one with the kitchen knife and I still work for you. If you even think for a second you can take me. If you see, his face changes silly and almost was like the life came back too. He literally did something that I thought you only see in the movies. He dropped the knife on the floor and walked away. I picked up a knife, went back to the sink to look at my face again. He came back in and said, you're right, and gave me a glass of water. He purses his lips together as almost to say I fucked up, and he walked out of the room. I thought to myself I was the man. Wow, I was wrong. I don't know what was in that drink, but about 5 minutes after drinking it I started feeling woozy. And the time I thought it was a concussion or something. I remember thinking, man, I must have taken more head damage than I expected. So much so then on my way back to my bedroom I fell on the ground. The next thing I remember, somebody dragged me by my feet into my room, is better, forcibly dragged me onto the chair, which I couldn't fight back and barely had control over anything. Remember thinking this in my bedroom, dude, what are you doing? I took him some time to get me onto the chair, to which I guess he used an extension cord to tie me there. I have a hard time remembering exactly what happened, so I'm just gonna tell you what I remember and leave out the things that I'm not 100% sure. Remember the loud music, and somebody standing in front of me with a kitchen knife. That kitchen knife got jammed into my mouth, so that end actually cut open a big gash in the roof of my mouth. Hearing someone say, I ought to kill you right here. I was punched repeatedly, defenseless. How many sit there and just take it? Not sure what was going on. Who was it? What is my roommate? Couldn't be. He might have some crazy emotions going on, but this isn't him. They begin to pull down my pants and make fun of my package. He said, how could I be so confident if that's what I was walking around with? He shaved half my head and wrote words like jock, muscle man, and coward on me in permanent marker. As he wrote, I noticed it was his left hand. I didn't think my roommate was left-handed. I went in and out of consciousness. The last thing I remember was them gently moving the knife just under both my eyes, saying I should kill you right here. I must have passed out, 'cause when I came to it was daylight, and I sat there for 3 more hours until my other roommate came home. He couldn't believe what he had saw. It was a pool of blood around me. I was naked as I was writing on me. You got me out of the chair and asked when I wanted to do, and I want to keep the shit in my other roommate. Will you convince me to call the cops instead? It took about 30 minutes for the cops to show up, and then they started questioning everything. They found out that there was a fight downtown and they connected me to that. The other guy cited me at the house, the guy in the fight. And what's worse is my blood must have wiped away the permanent marker, because by the time I was cleaned up you couldn't tell anybody it wrote anything on me. The cops have decided that the meeting was not from my roommate. It was from the fight downtown. He said there was no proof then I was tortured, and the bruises on my ribcage, on my stomach, on my face were from the fight. And the only evidence that they have that is my other roommate claiming that when he got home I was tied to the chair. But my roommate was not the most trustworthy guy. He had some prior charges and prior fines for minor things, so the cops dismissed it as him just covering for me. Coincidentally, my roommate decided to drop out of school at night. We were never able to get a hold of him. He canceled all his social media, changed his phone number, and for some reason months after, the cops still didn't care that he did all this. What exactly happened that night? I don't know. I know I still have some nightmares because of it. Who was it? I don't know. Why did he drop out right away? All I know is he was right. My night, they get a lot worse.